Yafo Union College and the NYU of Tel Aviv. And her talk is In the Valley of the Equals, Reconstructing a Phoenician State System Around Tel Dan. Please.
Thank you, Khalid, and Shalom, and thank you for the organizers, Naama and Alex and Oren.
Can you talk to the microphone?
I can try, sure. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for the organizer for inviting us to this Phoenician banquet. Let's start. The Valley of the Equals, exactly. Even today, from 1,000-year distance of a continuous habitation, one moment. It doesn't, with the mouse. Okay, thank you. The landscapes of the Hula Valley to the south and the Lebanese Bekaa to the north stand out in their uniqueness. Arable alluvial land, abundant water sources, vineyards and olive orchards. By the beginning of the first millennium BCE, Phoenicia and the southern Levant went through a gradual process during which the former Canaanite city-state gave way to bricolage of towns and villages that were consolidated on a regional basis. It's still the
arrow key, but the part. No, on the keyboard.
on the keyboard, sorry.
But you have to hit it hard.
I'm violent.
But everyone's equal.
So now you know all my secrets. Without understanding, underestimating, the discussion of political relation, this lecture digs into the sources of life in its quotidian dimension, which is far less subject to destruction and far more human in its anonymity. Today, we will pursue possible short-distance economic and social contacts between indigenous groups of the two neighboring zones, the Hula and the Bekaa. For this end, I shall explore the role that certain material culture manifestations played in short-term regional communities. How might it account for their unique distribution patterns across urban space, and what type of contact is reflected through them? Yeah. This lecture is dedicated to the memory of Professor Amnon Bento, who was a good friend and a good neighbor. He was the head of all those kingdoms. Much of Amnon's interest in the last years was dedicated to local Iron Age II communities of the Hula Valley and the Upper Galilee, and to those somewhat elusive Phoenicians. Any attempt to discuss the archaeological visibility of the Phoenicians must start with the realization that etymologically the name is a classical construct. A region called Phoenicia is first mentioned in the Hellenistic sources. It turns out that Iron Age II Phoenicia did not exist as a self-conscious collective or people. Assyrian royal inscriptions of the 8th century BCE mentioned Phoenicians by their cities. Sennacherib mentioned Luli, king of Sidon, and the Sarchedon signed a discriminating treaty with Baal, king of Tyre. While the Phoenicians perceived themselves in the level of the city or the family, modern national construct adopted the generic term Phoenicians that became the most common name used for the Iron Age II Lebanese population. The latter never used the word to describe themselves, nor was the word Phoenicia employed to designate their land. Quoting Josephine Quinn, the fundamental difficulty with labels like Phoenician is that they offer answers to questions about historical explanation before they have been asked. They assume an underlying commonality between the people they designate that cannot easily be demonstrated. They produce new identities where they didn't, to our knowledge, exist. And they freeze in time particular identities that were in fact in a constant process of construction from inside out. Considering this, the Phoenicians can be defined as an indigenous local group within Lebanon, which participated actively in the change of the social conditions that characterize the transition of the late Bronze Age to the Iron Age. In a way, these difficulties in assigning specific material culture manifestation to the Phoenicians or attaching ethnic labels to the basic elements of the Phoenician assemblage have resulted in a scientific approach that doomed the Iron Age to Phoenicians to an undeserved obscurity. Loyal to the current perception of regionalism, this lecture wishes to shed light on the economic and political contact that existed between two neighboring regions, the Lebanese Bekaa to the north and the Hula Valley to the south, in the period that preceded the Assyrian conquest. Assemblages that discovered in pre-Assyrian Dan is associated with strata 4 to 2a. For the sake of this paper, I concentrated on material culture that is associated with the Phoenician sphere, whether directly imported or inspired by, especially short-distance contacts that Dan maintained with its neighbors to the north. In this short overview of the Phoenician ceramic repertoire, we involve the morphological and quantitative study of complete, half-complete, full profile, and indicative sherds. A so-called Phoenician assemblage, a Dan, includes bowls, craters, store jars, decanters, flasks, pyxes, and bottles. The lion's share, more than 90% of the ceramic repertoire, were storage vessels and containers in various forms. A comprehensive provenance, analysis, I lost myself, and the study of the compositional variability that was made by Mark Isserles and by me sampled 90 vessels from the Iron Age II inner town. Of these, 85 vessels originated from clean Iron Age II archaeological context. 8 of the sampled vessels were associated with strata 2b and 2a of the first and the second half of the 8th century BCE. 3 petrographic groups were identified as Phoenicians. Vessels that were made from basalts originated from the southern slopes of the Anti-Lebanon and the Hermon Massif that are situated at circa 15 kilometers away from Tel Dan. Petrographic group C can be linked by its matrix and inclusions to the Levantine lower Cretaceous formations. Its basaltic sections are exposed widely along Mount Lebanon and the Anti-Lebanon. For the 8th century BCE, the square decanter was identified. Sample of petrographic group CC contain components of marl, shells, and calcareous rocks that are typical for the Lebanese Bekaa, the mountains, and the coast. Here, a small decanter with a straight wall and flat base is made. When comparing the typological and functional differences between vessels, we believe that these vessels were produced by a specific workshop, different than the one that produced the local ware at Dan. Vessels that belong to petrographic group E are made of well-navigated clay and display morphological traits typical of vessels that are found along the northern coast and to forms that are usually considered exceptional in the local ceramic repertoire. Counted among these are store jars with straight wall, sharply carinated shoulder and a vertical neck, flasks, pyxes, and bottles. Other Phoenician candidates that have not been sampled yet include round carinated bow with splayed rim and sharp carination, a whole-mouth bichome crater, ovoid store jar, sharply carinated shoulder store jar, and simple Phoenician flask. Vessels of Phoenician origin were found in both domestic and public context at Dan. One of the surprises of the renewed study was the discovery of group of seal impressions bearing the image of a figure, most likely a male, with each of its outstretched arms grasping the horns of a rearing ibex. Thus far, 7 seal impressions of this type are known from Dan, 6 of which have been found in pre-Assyrian context. A well-known motif, the Lord of the Animals, has been found as early as the 4th millennium BCE from Egypt to Mesopotamia. A parallel to the impression from Dan has been found in nearby Tel Abel Bet Maacha, and the corpus from both sides is subject for a joint project between us and the Abel group. During Biran's excavation of the sacred precinct of Dan, in a small cell of one of the storerooms, 2 upright pithoi were found. The pithoi, each of over 300-liter capacity, were decorated by the snake motif. On the rim of one pithos, the Lord of the Animals was stamped. The room and the pithoi were dated by Biran to stratum 4a. In summer 1968, Biran and his team discovered of the southern edge of the mound area H a Phoenician inscription. On the shoulder of a Phoenician amphora were the letters Lebaal Pelet, read as belonging to a person by the name of Baal Pelet, Baal save or redeem. The inscription was incised before the vessel was fired. 5 additional inscriptions displaying the same technique, some of them are fragmentary, and involving some of the letters of this unique name were found at Dan, suggesting a broad distribution of Lebaal Pelet vessels across the urban space. Iron Age 2 layers and their assemblages that preceded the Assyrian conquest of Dan tell a story in which local geographical genetics is interwoven with history. Beyond its political structure, economic and cultural interaction that occurred between these two regions, left their mark on their local record. The medieval lords of South Lebanon share certain commonalities and thus can illuminate the Iron Age 2 context. In his foundational book, A House of Many Mansions, the Lebanese historian Kamal Salibi centers on the idea that the Lebanese society is made of a multiple, often conflicting ethnic and communal groups, a patchwork of various ethnic and religious communities. These groups claim different origins, histories, and cultural identities that are deeply rooted in historical myth or constructed narratives. Divided by the tributaries of Nahar al-Damur, the southern Lebanese homeland is organized in a rosette pattern that provides an easy access from one district to the other. The topographical unity is also reinforced by Jabal al-Baru, which stretches wall-like along its eastern border. Southern Lebanese villages before the 8th century CE retained Canaanite and Aramaic names. The area was inhabited by indigenous Christian peasants who were later joined by semi-nomadic military colonies that were fused into a new community with leaders who were allowed to keep their autonomy. Dominating the internal scene in southern Lebanon, the House of Bukhtur of the Garb controlled the southern approaches to the harbor of Beirut, as well as the road accessing the hills of Damascus. In 1154 CE, the Mamluk ruler of Syria, Nur ad-Din, recognized the Bukhturite leader as the emir of the Garb and granted him most of the villages of the districts in Ikta, in addition to villages in the Bekaa. In 1187 CE, the young Jamal ad-Din Haji was recognized by the Sultan as the owner of seven villages, his property and inheritance from his fathers and grandfathers, indicating a policy in which agricultural fields were cultivated and directed autonomously by the locals and certain tax duties. Throughout mid-16th century and until the end of the 17th century, the emirs of the Man dynasty enjoyed an impressive autonomy and controlled southern Lebanon and parts of Palestine, including the Hula Valley. Under Ottoman rule, the Emirate of Mount Lebanon allotted tax farming rights in frontier areas to ethnic or tribal chiefs who enjoyed varying degrees of autonomy if they provided the high port with a fixed number of purses, armed men, and order in the regions under rule. The system of traditional land tenure was organized so that the land was redistributed every few years through a lottery system to maintain level of equality between members of the Hamula. Each family cultivated and reaped the produce of their own land and had used the hereditary rights to the land. Land outside the village for grazing and collecting firewood was held in common by all members of the clan. As a strategic agrarian corridor and one of the most productive rural regions in Ottoman Palestine, the Bekaa connected Damascus with the Mediterranean ports in northern Syria with Palestine. Their specialization was crop and surplus-oriented, with wheat and barley dominating the Bekaa and distributed to Damascus and Mount Lebanon. The region also supported large-scale pastoralism, sheep and goat, transhumance between the anti-Lebanon and the Horan. Vineyards, fruits, and vegetables were also distributed. In what follows, I would like to focus on the interregional contacts from the commodity branding perspective. Like their modern counterparts, ancient societies used to add product value by creating brands to indicate ownership. Archaeological theory of commodization paid little attention to concrete mechanism of sealing, labeling, and marking. Specialized form of product labeling in pre-modern societies have been studied either in terms of their administrative rules or from a purely iconographic perspective. Ancient Near Eastern communities used various signs on labels that were attached to a wide range of commodities such as textile, oil, and alcoholic drinks that were stored and transported in standardized ceramic containers. These labels not only provide bureaucratic information about relating to quality and provenance, but also carry images that link the commodities to geographic location and cultural context. As early as the 3rd millennium BCE, Mesopotamian texts from Uruk described the marking of cattle and other commodities as to brand. Temple and palace bureaucracies used, sorry, the glasses killing me, used system of marking and notation, not only to monitor the quantity and quality of manufactured goods, but also to enhance the value of such products through specialized procedures of packing and labeling. A range of commodities and specialized packing was available in town: dairy products, meats and oils for cooking and cosmetic use, as well as types of bread and beer that are enumerated and classified according to fine-grained criteria distinction. Among the impression that sealed the package, one find bestiary images, real and fictions, people drinking and banqueting, and the hybrid figure with human body and ram's head, whose hold aloft a pair of snakes. Andrew Sheret suggested that high-quality commodities were exchanged between the urban center at the alluvium plain and its surrounding highland that were sparsely populated but controlled access to certain resources. David Van Gogh added that placing a premium on specialized modes of marking and packaging ensured quality and signaled relationships of exclusivity across shared scales of some sumptuary value. For the Southern Levant, several scholars surmise that certain terms that are mentioned in Judean and Israelite ostraca depict high-quality agricultural products such as premium wine and oil. With this, one may found shemen rachatz and yen ha'aganut. In the Ottoman period, several goods originating from urban centers and agricultural estates were traded through Sidon and acted as reputational gatekeeper. South Lebanese villages were known for their oil quality like Zayt Jabal Amil and the soap. Silk and raw silk were identified by the region or even the merchant's house. In what way these insights contribute to our understanding of Iron Age II till Dan? Array of biblical references and archaeological remains imply that as a gathering sanctuary, Dan offered services for those who made the long way of pilgrim. By looking at Dan as a geographical anchor, the site's key role in negotiating membership of people in broad collectives and in defining belonging to regional culture is revealed. That Iron Age IIA Dan presents an unbearable gap between monumental architecture displayed at the gate complex and the sacred pressing and scanty evidence for dwelling is well known. Its geographic location on a crossroad connecting diverse ecological settings constitute a place where various cultic activities take place: pilgrimage, banqueting, and sacrifice, accompanied by concentrating the finest agricultural products that the houses in the Hula and the Beka produced. Public gathering at Dan entailed the consumption of specialized food and pottery. Isotopic analysis on tooth and nail of domestic sheep and goats from Iron Age II context at Dan showed that none of the animals was brought from a distance greater than 10 to 20 kilometers from Dan. However far pilgrims traveled to the site, the animals sold for sacrifice and consumption were raised locally. Analysis of Iron Age IIA assemblages from Dan reflects a stark imbalance between objects of conspicuous consumption and objects of primary production. This imbalance may imply the temporality of its settlement and difference between settlers and consumers. Thus, gathering at Dan generated process of social complexity and power that were vital for the creation of communal identity of the indigenous. Canaanites, Phoenicians, Neo-Hittites, Yahvistic, Israelites, and others. While this insight challenged deep-seated assumption about the settlement pattern that differs from that of the typical city-village concept, it offers a new way to understand the relations between the mound of the judge and its environs. In a seminal work about the Lebanese Beka, Leon Marfo showed how local communities organized their settlement by integrating environmental data, land, water source, and routes. More recently, Asaf Kleinman emphasized the unique settlement history and material identity maintained by Iron Age II Iron Age 2 local community like nearby Hula Valley. The regional culture that developed in the northern Hula Valley was strongly connected to its ecology. Objects associated with the Phoenician spheres were found in both public and domestic contexts. Leaving the unique Phoenician assemblage from the sacred precinct aside, a review of the Phoenician objects points at clear preference to containers and storage vessels in various forms and sizes. Some were imported from the Lebanese coast, others from the inland. When adding the relatively large number of marks on vessels, seal impressions, and Phoenician names, one gets the impression of a necessity to mark commodities, the finest local products that were collected to the regional gathering place. In his Mediterranean in the Historical Thought, Fernand Braudel noted, most cultural transactions are performed by anonymous carriers. These transactions are multiple, some slow, and they expand in so many directions in this junction of commerce where nothing remains in place and where it is very difficult to find a place. On every shipment that his owner is known, there are 1,000 that are unknown. Addresses and labels are missing. Sometimes the content has been lost, and sometimes the package. As far as ideas, sentiments, and techniques are concerned, all mysteries are possible. Like the Iron Age 2 groups around Jerusalem and Samaria, wealthy local landowners, having made their money in livestock, olive oil, and wine, and who identified themselves with the regional center at Dan, developed the local dynasties of the Hula and the Beka around strong international economic engineered by a system of trade and commerce, a place where geography provided the material from which the gods were created. Thank you very much.
Any questions, please? One.
So thank you. That was really fascinating, and I learned a lot. But you'd mentioned interregional trade, and you very nicely presented the local wares and the marked ceramics, which I assume are mostly local, and imports it looked like from the Phoenician coast. Were there also imports perhaps from southern Aramea or what is that? North Israel? Were there other regions, small regions that were connecting into Dan?
Are you asking about Syrian regions or general Israel, to the south as well?
Just other regions besides Phoenicia.
Of course, there are. I didn't have time to talk about our petrographic project. It's large. It's going to be presented in a separate chapter in our final report of the inner town of Tel Dan, and we have. We have a huge corpus of imported ware from various locations, including Judah, the Negev, Cyprus. It's all is there. It's just I wanted to focus on short distance relations, commercial relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, and maybe last, talk for tonight is by my research partner, Ilan Gronau of Rashman University. He's going to talk about the Phoenician Ancient DNA Project, challenges in uncovering the origins of a diverse Mediterranean population.
Okay, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me, kind of an outlier in this type of meeting, coming from computer science and genetics. And I will present the results we published last year from the Ancient DNA Project of Phoenicians. Okay, now I need to figure out. Oh, yeah. So what interests us when we study ancient DNA, ancient Phoenician DNA, is to understand how the vast trade networks of Phoenicians in the Mediterranean influenced their population structure in different locations and different settlements. And I'll present today results that we published last year, last spring in this paper. Dalit is my close collaborator on everything Phoenician, and David Reich did all of the sequencing, DNA sequencing in his lab, and coordinated the samples from, as you'll see here, from many locations. Harold is kind of coordinated the analysis, and Ayelet, a postdoc at my group, did a lot of the ancestry inference that I'll show you today. So the data we collected focused on a little more than 100 samples. These are 100 individuals from Phoenician settlements almost all around the Mediterranean. And just to give you an idea of what was kind of known before, so previously there were like sporadic samples. There were 12 samples from Beirut, for instance, and then 7 from Sardinia, and then here and there in samples. So it was very difficult to have a very kind of coherent picture of what Phoenician population structure was more globally. So we had in our data set, again, something like 13 more samples from the Levant and many, many more samples from other locations. That's kind of our focus, was to try to understand what was Phoenician population structure outside of the Levant. Now, one important caveat before I show you the results is that most of our samples, well, all of our samples post-date the late 6th century, just because of the very common practice of cremation before that. So this is kind of a snapshot. They're scattered, so they're pretty much all from late 6th century all the way to the 2nd century. So it's a pretty long period, but we are missing kind of the earlier periods of Phoenician settlement in the Mediterranean. So the first thing you do when you analyze ancient DNA is kind of project the data onto these two-dimensional principal component maps. So I'll just kind of walk you through what we're seeing here. So we're not seeing anything Phoenician yet. Each dot in this map is an individual. The light gray dots, these are present day individuals from around the Mediterranean. They help us kind of create this map of genetic diversity. And on top of this map, we project ancient samples. These are the colored dots, still not Phoenician. These are mostly Bronze Age, Iron Age individuals from different places around the Mediterranean. So you can see that during this period, things are very localized. So individuals who come from the same context are very similar genetically. That's what we see. They're kind of clustered based on the origin where we sampled them. Now, on top of this, we project our 100 and so Phoenician samples, and you can see they're much more spread out. They don't like cluster based on region. And we see two main things. So one important observation is that Phoenicians from the Levant, from Akhziv and Beirut here, they're all clustered next to Levantine Bronze Age individuals. So they're very similar to kind of Canaanite counterparts. Whereas individuals from everywhere else, central, western Mediterranean, they form a much kind of wider spread. So it is structured. There is, most of them are kind of around this cluster here that you can see, similar to Bronze Age individuals from Sicily and Greece. But there are quite a few outliers, and there is this long kind of what we call a cline from this cluster to North African individuals from the Iron Age and Neolithic, right? So what we get is a very complex population structure. So one thing we wanted to know is to see whether this diversity, so Phoenician individuals had very diverse diverse kind of genetics. We wanted to see whether this diversity was within a settlement or between the settlements. And what we see here is we measure for each of the settlements, we measure their kind of diversity, how spread out they are in this 2D principal component map, and each dot here is a settlement. So what you can see is that there are quite a few Phoenician settlements in Sicily and North Africa. These are most of the ones you see up here that are very diverse, especially compared to kind of locations in the Bronze Age and Iron Age earlier. So you see this kind of diversity later on as we move to the Roman period, but kind of Phoenician settlements are the first ones in at least in current recorded history that show this diversity. And you see a similar thing also on the Y chromosome. I'll skip this. So one thing to note is that this projection, this on two-dimensional map, so we already kind of get an idea, get hypotheses as to what's happening with these Phoenician populations. We see this split between the Levant and other regions, but we can't say anything. So it's just hypothesis. So this observation that Phoenicians from Achziv are genetically similar to Bronze Age and Iron Age Canaanites, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily closely related. We wanted to test this. Oh, sorry again. So we see this as a hypothesis that we wanted to test whether Phoenicians in the Levant derive most of their ancestry from Bronze and Iron Age Canaanites. And similarly, with Phoenicians outside of the Levant, we wanted to test whether we could derive their ancestry from kind of these diverse sources, right? And for that, we need kind of a bit more sophisticated methodology. It's called QPADM. So it does direct ancestry inference. We try to model each individual as a combination of different ancestries. So we use like this basic background model for ancestry, and then we try to use these kind of clusters that you see here, these colored clusters, as proxies of potential sources that could contribute ancestry to our Phoenician individuals. And we used it in two types of, sorry, again, the directions. And mixing two types of models. So because we want to see whether there are really two distinct models of ancestry. There is the Eastern model, which we expect will fit two Phoenicians in the Levant, where we have a mix of Levantine and maybe more Mesopotamian ancestry and North African ancestry, which we will expect will fit the Levantine Phoenicians, whereas a Western model kind of doesn't use the Levant at all as ancestry and actually moves it to the model of background ancestry, which means we can actually exclude contribution from the Levant. So we use these two types of models. And when we do that, we see, again, this very clear cut where the individuals from Achziv, they are very clearly modeled with this Eastern model. So most of them are really share almost all of their ancestry with Bronze and Iron Age Canaanites. So they're very, very similar. There is a direct connection there. There is some possible contribution also from Mesopotamia and maybe North Africa, but overall they're pretty much Canaanites. Whereas Phoenicians from other locations, they have, again, this much more diverse ancestry. The most dominant component is this Sicilian, we call it Sicilian Aegean ancestry, this blue that you see here. And the second most dominant is probably this North African component, which you see in varying quantities in different places. So before we drill down into different regions, one thing we wanted to see is to understand this North African ancestry, because as you see here, there seems to be a lot of variability in the amount of North African ancestry you see in different places. So want to study it. So here we quantify how much North African ancestry we see in different individuals. So again, each dot is an individual, and we plot it against the amount of North African ancestry we infer in these bar plots, and also plot against its location in this 2D map. So we see these match pretty nicely. So it means that what we see here in this 2D map really so when we see an individual here, this really is some admixture of North African ancestry and Sicilian Aegean ancestry. And more, we see that if we look at the earlier samples that kind of predate the 4th century BC, these are the red dots in this map. So most of the red dots in this map that have like substantial North African ancestry, they actually originate from North Africa, from Kerkuan and Carthage. So Phoenician settlements in North Africa. And we see this North African ancestry only later, kind of outside of North Africa and Sicily. Especially here in Sardinia, we definitely see the older samples. In Tharos, they almost don't have this North African ancestry, whereas the later ones do have it substantially. So we hypothesize that this North African ancestry kind of originated in some interactions in the Phoenician settlements in North Africa, and they spread out from there to other settlements. Now, moving on to kind of region by region, just to show you some highlights of things that we noticed. So in North Africa, in the 2 settlements we sampled in North Africa, in Kerkuan and Carthage, one thing we see that we already mentioned is this kind of continuum of North African ancestry. Some individuals don't have any. So first of all, the dominant ancestry is not North African, it's the Sicilian Aegean. So there were people of this Sicilian Aegean ancestry that settled in Carthage and in this area. And these are most of the Phoenicians we sampled there, again, from the 6th century onward, have this ancestry with some North African ancestry as well. One kind of interesting, mysterious thing that we don't quite know is this Mesopotamian ancestry. So there is some hint of ancestry that might have come from the east. This is this pink. We don't fully know what this means. We're now actually trying to investigate it more deeply.
What date is that?
So all of this is here all after like 4th and 3rd century. In other locations, so in Sardinia and Iberia, what we see is mostly we see the same thing. We do see in some cases, like these 2 individuals in Cadiz and Ibiza, they have what appears to be kind of local Iberian ancestry. So they don't have the regular kind of Sicilian Aegean ancestry. So there might have been some mix, and we're now analyzing more individuals from that region, and we're seeing this kind of confirmed that there was an interaction between kind of ethnic Phoenicians and local populations. In Sicily, we see kind of, again, pretty much the same makeup. You do see these 2 Levantine individuals, but they do come from later periods. So the post-date, the kind of 4th century, we think that this is not connected to Levantine origins of these settlements, but maybe later migrations that came from the Levant closer to the kind of Roman period, where we know that in the Roman period, there was more migration from the Levant to other places in the Mediterranean. It probably started earlier. So we think this is connected with this, and we actually analyzed some individuals from the Roman period, and we see kind of similar patterns of this Levantine ancestry. So overall, what this indicates, so it's a very complex pattern. It's not simple. We don't have a very simple characterization of what is the ancestry of a Phoenician individual. But what we do see is that these patterns are complex, but they seem to be quite similar in different settlements, at least again in the central and the western Mediterranean. So we do see this split of the Levant from other locations, but other locations seem to be very similar. And it again raises the idea that there was a lot of connection between these settlements. So we tried to directly test that. And you can do that by looking at pairs of individuals and trying to find kind of long stretches of chromosomes that are identical. And what this indicates is if you find such pairs of individuals, it indicates that they share some common ancestor in their genealogy, say something like 10 generations back. So they're not close relatives, but they are somewhat connected in kind of a larger genealogical context. So if you do this for other populations of ancient individuals, you typically don't find any connection, even from individuals that come from nearby sites, because these populations were pretty much isolated. But this is not what we see in the Phoenician network. So there were about 90 individuals we could do this analysis on, and we found 34 pairs of individuals with these kind of distant relations. And here you can see a map from the different locations. So you see several things here. One thing that's nice is, first of all, most of the connections are within site, which makes sense, but there are some connections between sites. Some of the connections within sites we could actually use to kind of construct these pedigrees. We have this 3-individual pedigree from Tharos, from Sardinia, a grandparent, son-in-law, and a grandchild. And one nice thing you can see here that these individuals have somewhat different kind of genetics. So they were not families, the Phoenician families were already diverse. They were not kind of homogeneous kind of groups within Phoenicians. There was a lot of mixing going on within a family. So we can see that here. And we also see hints of that in this larger pedigree in Kerkuan, where you have these 2 individuals that are kind of 3rd and 4th degree relatives. And one of them is like 50% North African ancestry. So again, we see these specific examples of mixing within a family of different ancestries. And one more interesting thing we see in this analysis is that we see all of these pairs that connect 2 individuals from different sites, and sometimes quite far, like from Malaga and Birgi in Sicily, or most of these connections are actually from kind of the North African settlements and settlements in Sicily, which makes sense because they're close. But this is something you don't see at all. You don't see any connections before Phoenician times. So these Phoenician trade networks really facilitated a lot of connections between these different places. Maybe I'll skip this and maybe return to that if there are questions. Another thing we can do is test kind of how related are the parents of each individual we analyze, and we can use it to try to understand practices of mating of close relatives. And I'll just jump to the bottom line. What we see is that it was not prevalent. It was pretty rare, but it was persistent. So we see it in each settlement. We see cases like that, but they're not the rule. They're the exception. So it's something that happened in Phoenician societies, but it wasn't the rule. So I'd like to summarize kind of the main points and maybe end with kind of the main open question that is that kind of we're left with. I think the main important thing we see is that Phoenicians, kind of Western Phoenicians outside of the Levant, after from the 6th century and onward, were genetically distinct from Levantine Phoenicians. It's a very clear cut, and we actually can see that we don't see any traces of Levantine ancestry in their kind of genealogies. And they were very diverse. So they were kind of a combination of Mediterranean populations, mostly from around maybe the central and maybe eastern, maybe I would say broadly this area, people from somewhere in the central and eastern Mediterranean came together and created this pool of ancestors of these individuals that we see here. We don't really know where they came from, so it's still a mystery. And we see this evidence of a lot of mobility and connection between all of the settlements, again, from the central Mediterranean and westward. We see a disconnect with the Levant, but a lot of connectivity here. And again, this sporadic yet persistent practice of consanguinity, of kind of mating of close relatives. And so the main open question I'd like to end with, and maybe we can use that to start the discussion, is kind of when and where did these people that were not, did not have any ancestral affinity to Canaanites, when did they adopt the Phoenician kind of way of life and culture and religion? That's a question, and we're somewhat limited currently in addressing this because we don't have any ancient DNA samples that predate the 6th century. We're trying now to get to that, and we hope that we will be able to shed some light on this. But that's the main open question, I think, that's left here. And I'd like to again thank the many people who contributed to this large project and my kind of close collaborators in the analysis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ilan. Any question? No? Please.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's on.
Thank you so much for your lecture. It's very enlightening. And of course, I'm familiar with your article. One thing that struck me is there's really big gaps regionally in some of your material. And I think what's really, to me, the most significant area that's missing is Cyprus.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, Turkey, the coast of Turkey, Anatolia would be great, but I
Yeah,
know how
Greece.
difficult it is to work with Turkey.
Yeah.
And get samples out, but certainly Cyprus, I think, is really a key factor
Yeah.
in chasing the genetics.
I can tell you, I can tell a spoiler, I can tell a little bit. So we sampled Cyprus. We were there actually in October 2023. We flew back at October 7. Exactly, it was like one of the last flights into Israel. It was a mess, but it was somewhat fruitful. We have some samples, but we were, after that, we weren't able to get any more. So we have a handful of samples. We do see something that is a bit different there. We do see some mix, but we don't know, and it's a bit too few to tell a convincing story. But there is a hint that if we are able to increase our sample set from the Greek island, Cyprus, and Anatolia, maybe we will see something, a different picture. It's very plausible, yes.
Yes. I don't know, keep you to this.
You showed the map, and the Canaanite group had a spread with an incline towards bottom. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with north and southern samples, but it goes towards the Egyptian cluster, or there was.
Oh, sorry.
there were
Like
a
the
few some-
PCA here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just shows.
Most interesting was the fact that the Phoenician was overlapping only with the upper part of the Canaanite cluster, right?
Here?
Oh,
I see. Well, first of all, there are some individuals here. I would say it's pretty much, it's not, maybe it's hard to compare the distributions. Like you'd want to say maybe they're more focused here and the Canaanites are more spread. It's hard, and you'll need to see the context in the Canaanites. The contexts are different from different sites. And maybe different time periods. So it's probably difficult to make this direct comparison. We do see a slight difference, right? The difference I would actually highlight is that there is maybe a pull toward the more central Mediterranean. So there might be some traces of other Mediterranean ancestries in Phoenicians that you don't see in other Canaanites. That's something you might actually.
okay, thank you.
And we saw in the literary sources, we saw some of them today. There's the myth that the Phoenicians married women in Cyprus and then founded the colonies. So is there any indication in Y chromosome or mitochondrial DNA to show perhaps something like this?
Yeah, so I skipped the Y chromosome results because they're not very interesting. So the Y chromosome is very diverse as well, and there is no indication of a Y chromosomal source. It's just all over the place. Mitochondrial DNA, we didn't look very closely. I would be surprised if it's very different. I think it's probably much more complex than that.
Did you sample men and women or only men?
We sample whatever there is, about half and half. But it wouldn't matter, because if it's 3 generations after the founding, it doesn't matter if a female or male, right? Because your children are going to have your genetics, no matter if they're male or female.
Can I,
Yeah.
just a selfish question and a comment. I mean, I noticed quite a few Iranian
Yeah.
samples in your data. And so it would be interesting to look, and maybe you have already looked at the connection between endogamy and are the people, Zoroastrians practice that. So you have some characteristics of endogamy in your data in data, and so cross-check that with the Iranian province.
Endogamy, you mean like a
Like
marriage of a
marriage
close
within
relative?
the-
There is no, there is no correspondence.
No correspondence.
But also this Iranian ancestry, I think it's something we need to take with a grain of salt, because that is kind of the proxy to some ancestry source. That's the closest one we found. So what we think is, what is captured by that is probably some relatively Eastern component that is not captured by, say, Bronze Age Greek and Sicilians.
So it just means the East, basically.
So I think it
Eastern-
could probably come. We see in later analysis, we can see it might come from Anatolia, might
Right.
come from Armenia. We don't know.
Okay.
So it's not culturally
Iranian.
Iranian or Mesopotamian.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
So I read your article with great interest. I have just 2 questions out of ignorance, and hopefully you can clarify. But how many samples from one site do you need before it's significant? Like if you have 3 samples from one site versus 10?
So
And then
yeah.
The other, I'll ask. both
Yeah,
of them.
sure.
And then the second one is these types of things in antiquity, if you pick up a language or a religion or customs, that's your identity. But if it's not, if your identity like this is not visible, Like you can't walk up to somebody on the street and say, you're 2% Sardinian. Why would it matter back then to those people? Like, would you be able to see people within your group, and why would that matter that there's this genetic diversity?
I don't know. No. So first of all, I'm not necessarily saying that you might. So I'll answer your first question. So it depends on what you want, to be able to say. You can do with even one or two individuals, but because what we're doing here is trying to really characterize each individual and then putting it together. So that is, I think, what you see in, yeah, in like these plots. Here is that, for each individual, we're very much convinced in the picture we're structuring for them. Now, how many individuals you need to get a big picture, it depends on the picture you want to paint. So I think there are some sites where we have very few individuals, probably can't say much about that site. But if you cluster it with nearby sites, you might be able to say something about the region. So this is what we tried to see. And I think what you can say with high confidence is that despite the fact that the Phoenician ancestry is very complex and diverse, it's pretty similar region from region, because we have very different regions, North Africa and like the central Mediterranean islands, Sardinia and Sicily, and the Western Mediterranean. And we see pretty similar patterns in different places. So it is coherent, I think, even with not a very large sample set. And to answer your second question, so I agree that we wouldn't necessarily expect the Phoenicians to really care about, to be able to be, I don't know, care, but to be sensitive even to differences in the amount of ancestry. But I think what you do see in, again, earlier populations is you don't see this mixing. Even from, two settlements that are very nearby, they can be quite distinct genetically. And it's something we don't see in these Phoenician populations, probably because they started diverse. These cities got to be quite diverse early on, and they were used to it. It wasn't an issue. And even I would expect that North African ancestry would be something that's pretty visible, because they're quite distinct. And even that, you don't see a very large barrier to mixing with the, yeah.
Okay. Alex, Ayelet, and Aaron, okay?
Can you please go back to the slide with the 6 or 8 major population that you compared? You said that there are
Yeah. Here. This.
I just want to clarify this in order to see if I misunderstood. You said that you compared this, so you were under assumption that this major Levantine cluster will be compared to Achziv and Sidon, and the Sardinia Greek cluster will be compared to Western Phoenicians. That's correct? That's what you said, right?
I would expect the Levantine Phoenicians to be modeled with these Eastern models, and yeah.
But that's what I understood from what you were saying, that you applied.
But we tested but we tested. So we tested all of the individuals under these two models.
Okay. So you tested the Western ones and the Levantine.
And what you see here actually is that only or primarily the individuals from Achziv are the ones modeled by the Eastern. If like you do see individuals here that are modeled by the Eastern models, because we were able to fit them, but they were sporadic cases.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
So you applied both models to all of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
And the Western pedigree, did you apply on the
On
Canaanites?
Achziv, yeah, and they did what? There was no
Completely
fit.
different.
No fit. Yeah.
Thanks for clarification.
Yeah. It's a good point.
I don't understand anything about DNA, but I have an archaeological question. When you come to a certain cell, let's say Sedimonic, how do you define a Phoenician in Sedimonic? Who's Phoenician in Sedimonic? basically.
Yeah, so
population.
yeah, so Selinunte is probably is probably the most difficult to be able to do that. Italy, maybe that's for you.
In Sicily, you have to understand that along the line, we change criteria and approaches because we saw what's working, what's not working. In Sicily, we went to Phoenician cemeteries, but we wanted also some comparison with other local populations of similar times, similar cemeteries. Selinunte is really different in any way. Later, we moved to only like taking samples only from one Phoenician cemetery throughout, take everything that we can from one place. So things are changing archaeologically.
But I think the samples we took here are from parts of Selinunte that are, I don't know, at least in terms of time period, they align with the with Phoenician presence there, but they might be culturally, we don't have any cultural markings for the actual tombs. So they might, we don't know if they culturally saw themselves as Phoenicians. Yeah. Hmm?
How we
We
know that?
Yeah. You're saying you have Eastern Phoenicians, which
Mhm.
are clearly Canaanite, yeah, from the east. And all the others are not, they're not similar in any way to what you have in the east.
Mhm.
So how do you know that the samples that you have, that the individuals that you have, any of them is not is Phoenician and not something else, a totally different group of people which live somewhere in the middle between Africa and Sardinia and Sicilia. So it looks like a totally different population.
In terms of ancestry, yes,
Yes.
we
There's not even one. Well,
Uh-huh.
there are two.
Yeah, no, they're two, they're later, yeah.
They're later. So
Yeah.
you don't even one Phoenician or original Phoenician.
Yes,
person
exactly.
in the whole.
But they come from if they come from a Phoenician cemetery with clear Phoenician, you know, features, they're not found in the field, right?
And also all of them are post 6th century. You have to remember this. I mean, you cannot see traces after so long.
Even post-6, you have to find Near Eastern field.
But no, we don't. After
No, if it's like 10 generations back and you only have a few ancestors 10 generations back, you won't see it. Yeah, you see.
exactly, this is exactly the question. That's what we're dealing with, the Phoenician identity and who is Phoenician. We thought we can try and answer this through genetic studies. We cannot. That's the point.
Does it go lost?
It could go, yeah, because if you're looking at your ancestors 10 generations back, it's about several hundred ancestors you have. If only a handful of them are, say, Levantine, and that could be the case, and you will not be able to detect it in these tests. It will be a few percents, and you can't see a few percents in these analyses, so it will get lost.
You can't see it.
You can't see it. If it's just a few percent, you won't be able to find it. So we're not saying there is no connection, but it got so diluted that you don't see it. Most of their ancestors are not in the Levant at all. They're from other places in the Mediterranean.
And please remember what Anne asked the first question, which is really crucial. We don't have data from the most important places, from the places with first interaction between Canaanite Phoenicians and other populations. We have no data. This is another topic that we're going to talk about in the future, but we have no data from Cyprus, from the Eastern Greek islands, from Southern Anatolia. We have nothing. And of course, from North Africa, I mean, what we do have is very little evidence. A few from Kirkland, a few from Carthage, nothing yet. This is really a partial and ever-changing picture. And we still have now Lemer talk.
No,
And
we'll postpone this to tomorrow.
Oh, no,
One more
because I
question.
got,
One question, what about the Jewish population?
no, he's more? Excellent.
We can-
So I don't have to read his,
It's a organizer decision. We will postpone the mayor's talk for
No, but
tomorrow.
let's take it back.
Yeah,
yes, okay, Lemer is postponed for tomorrow.
9 a.m.
9,
Nine.
not
Oh.
9:59.
Which
So
is
that will
excellent.
allow us to discuss this a little bit further and without rush. Yeah?
Okay, okay,
What about the Jewish interference with Phoenicians? Do you have some samples about Phoenician traces into Jewish population? Vice
It's
versa?
like overall like Canaanite. So the Phoenicians are not in the Levant. They're not distinguishable pretty much from other Canaanites. So you don't need Phoenicians for that. It's very difficult. It's like the Canaanite interactions with Judeans. It's the same. They're all very similar.
So a provocative thought, and I might be completely off, but I see that also your kind of really clearly Canaanite DNA is also very early as well. Now the question is, could it be that Phoenicians at later stages, ethnic Phoenicians, so people from the Levant, continue to be cremated, and that's why you don't find them in cemeteries, but people who are kind of grafted into the Phoenician culture were buried in these Phoenician cemeteries, but those that were cremated, obviously you did not find their DNA.
So let me try to rephrase your comment and question in the way I understand it. So if there is a bias that individuals that have Levantine ancestry are more likely to cremate because of traditional practices, then that will be a blind spot in our analysis. And then whatever remains are individuals that don't have a strong ancestral tie to the Levant. It's possibly the case, but I think it's more because there is such a big gap between the settlement, say, of Carthage and our first sample from Carthage. So it just could be that time. So during that time, and we don't have any, at least in Carthage, we don't have any uncremated sample before the 6th century. So it's a very large gap, and anything could have happened during that time.
Thank you. This is really fascinating, and I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to read the article, but anyway, I got the more popular version, so Facebook or something. So I think there's a general misunderstanding, not with you guys, but in the group that doesn't understand DNA. This is measuring genetics.
Yeah.
But we're talking about it as if it's ethnicity or nationality, etc. And so all this represents is genetics.
Yes.
And so what, to me, as an outsider, it shows is that, there is a Mediterranean mix of indigenous groups, of incoming groups, both from Phoenicia and from Greece, which maps onto our more general picture of the Mediterranean in the first millennium. So thank you. And yeah. But again, genetics does not equal ethnicity, does not equal nationalism.
Yeah, of course. But I think it is, I think what we're trying to say here is that this appears to be one of the first cases where you see people, where you see this split between ancestry and culture or ethnicity, or the more complex notion of ethnicity. So these people likely saw themselves as Phoenicians. They might have even thought that they had ancestors in the Levant, because that was the tradition that passed, even if, it was only a few ancestors like way back. Yeah.
The only thing I would add to nuance that is that there was movement back and forth. We know, for instance, that the descendants of Tyrians in Carthage would go back to Tyre, some of them, to celebrate. So it's a completely movable scenario.
Yeah, but what we see, I think what we do see is that despite that, we don't see any evidence of connection between the Levant and even Carthage. So if that was commonplace, it would probably happened, but maybe with the high status people, then we would see a lot of mixing between the Levant
Sure.
and which we don't see.
Well, that would have been a brief incident.
Mhm.
And, you know, again, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah,
but
okay.
The whole point is that people move and people slept with each other, regardless of their origin, all that sort of thing. The same thing is true, and the same thing happened in the Mediterranean, you know, up until modern day nationalism. And so I think all of those concepts come into play. I really appreciate all of this. I'm not being.
By the way, I do like to maybe to try to push back a bit, because again, and that's I'm not an expert in that, but when you look at Greek colonies, you don't really see that. You see Greek colonists, people with very clear Greek genetics. They look very similar to people in Greece, and you don't see the mixing. So I think there was something social, cultural in the Phoenician population that facilitated this mix that was not, today we take it for granted maybe, but I think 3,000 years ago it was quite novel. People didn't really see it as very natural to, you know, mixed population within the Mediterranean.
Well, that's also a cultural thing, as you've just described.
Yeah.
So Greek culture had one way of marrying and interacting with indigenous peoples and Phoenicians. Phoenician culture had another way.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
saw examples yesterday. I don't know if you were here.
No,
But from the basal levels of a settlement in Spain at Huelva, it was very clear that the first Phoenicians there were living peacefully next to indigenous peoples.
Mhm.
And they probably were sleeping together.
Yeah.
They probably had
Yeah.
children together, so.
Okay, I have a question for the methodology. In the beginning, you showed that you have very distinct Greece, Sicily, Iberia, and Sardinia.
Yeah.
And here you mix Greece and Sicily and Iberia
Yeah.
plus Sardinia. I
Right.
would just ask, why did you do this?
Okay.
And what does it make with your results?
Yeah.
How
So
it
we
impacts
don't,
the
so in
results?
this is a simplification of the results. The analysis does treat like Greece and Sicily as two distinct sources, but what we saw is that the modeling technique we use here can't really distinguish them. They're still too similar to be able to say whether it came from the Greek component or Sicilian component. So to simplify and to add more certainty, we just say we can know that the accumulated amount of Greece and Sicilian ancestry is this. We don't know how much of this came from that or from that, and we don't even know if it's distinct. It's probably one source that is similar to what we see in Greece and Sicily. It's not really Greek people or people from Sicily. It's people who came from broadly that area.
Last question is to archaeologists among you two, because I follow in the footsteps of Daniel's question. How do you know that you have sampled Phoenicians, Western Phoenicians? Because you tell us that you sampled them, they are coming from Phoenician cemeteries. But what is Phoenician cemetery? Did you sample them from the grave that has a Phoenician inscription, or somebody just give you the bones and they told you that they are coming from Phoenician cemetery? What is the quality of the sample material? And I'm asking this not in order to diminish, but I did several things like this in Corinth, in Greece, and in Israel, and from old excavations. And in many cases, the material is completely mixed up. You can't believe a word of what the excavators are saying, because once you apply radiocarbon dates, suddenly they say you take a sample from 10th century and you receive Roman period, and it is all mixed up. So if you how certain we are about the quality of the sampling material here?
And I'll start with the bottom line. We're quite certain. because each and every place we go, we make sure we work with always with local teams of archaeologists, of anthropologists, of the museum staff, and we only sample from cemeteries that are for sure Phoenician, like Motia and Birgi. There are inscriptions, and material culture is very important. It's what we know as Phoenician. And actually, our first question that came unanswered was, is there any similarity between pots and people? I mean, do the material culture indicate of genetic identity? It does not. So we just took only from cemeteries that are certain and there are good results, and it's well kept. It's all kept in museums. We don't just scatter bones from everywhere. We go and work with the museum, with the staff, and with the archaeologists that either excavated or part of the project in the area that knows very well the situation. And this is the kind of material we take. About carbon dating, I just want to say again that we found out carbon dating is absolutely not reliable to many of our results. Like the main thing is you see building. You see this tomb that had 6th century BC Phoenician material, like absolute Phoenician, you know, glass, a male head, some attributes, and carbon dating was Roman period. From this came another article of ours in Radiocarbon about discrepancy with, between archaeological finds and carbon dating. But we don't rely on carbon dating.
But just to supplement this, all of these individuals are confirmed by carbon dating. So we did see some noisy carbon dating results. All of these are confirmed by carbon dating to these time periods. So the time period does correspond with Phoenician presence in that site.
Excuse me, I'm told that we must finish. We have continue.
So we will meet all the speakers downstairs and all our guests. We will be happy to see you here tomorrow back at 9 a.m.
Sorry, I can squeeze all my stuff. אז אני לא יודע אם בעתיד You can send me the PDF. I'll find a way through. Yeah. There's no place. Yeah. Finish those. I haven't. I might hold some different opinions, but yeah, that's fine. That's fine. There's something that, like those who graded, like which was Jeffrey Kahn and Ben Council, and they had some suggestions that I haven't appreciated anything yet. I agree with things to say about putting more weight on some things, less weight on things. So like, just I have that reservation to say Yeah, yeah, I'm good. It's my pleasure. No, no, it's okay. It's my pleasure. I love to be in touch. California, there's San Francisco. You or students or, I try and get because it needs to be researched, but in the area with the streets we work with, it's the summer break. So by definition, they're not interested. Most of them, they all are straight. Anyway. Yes, some. Most of them are interested in, aviation industry. But then it's a funny thing, so larger consortium that does the community. Some of them very young, so I've been there more than 2 decades and I've had one person do PhD that in so that's why I need dialogue and find others and but besides that, it's fascinating. It's nice to find a real expert who's, somebody in the future.
I'll drop you a line and umbrella. אולי לילדים.